Welcome. You've arrived at the edge of the quiet, where stories drift like fog and paths unfold like thoughts. Let the day soften. Let the night begin. We'll start with a mapmaker, and a place that listens. Nellen lived at the edge of a quiet village, where smoke rose from chimneys like thoughts not yet spoken, and the hills wore fog like woolen shawls. He was a cartographer, not of borders, nor empire, nor conquest. He mapped gentler things. Winding paths swallowed by grass. Rivers that changed color with the wind. Forgotten groves where stones hummed in the dark. His maps were sought not by merchants, but by wanderers, those who'd lost something nameless. He did not simply draw land, he recorded presence. The lean of trees. The hush of shaded hollows. The stories moss carried across 100 rains. His ink held the weight of silence. But one map, one alone, refused to be finished. It lay stretched across his table, the map of the unknown edge. For years, he'd drawn what he could. Trails that led nowhere. Ridges that circled back upon themselves. Whenever he walked past a certain grove, the world unraveled, paths curved where they hadn't. Trees changed species. Rocks reassembled. He returned with sketches. Notes. Observations. Yet each time, without fail, the ink faded. Not smeared. Not stolen. Vanished. As if the page had breathed and let go. No trick of the hand. No flaw in memory. The map erased itself. Still, each morning, he returned. With boots dusted and lichen, flask full of cool tea, satchel packed with patience. Not to conquer the land, but to listen to it. Beyond the third river bend, the land altered. The air thickened, gently. Not suffocating, but dense, like a dream remembered too clearly. Light filtered through the trees in long, angled beams. The birds were quiet. The wind held its breath. Nellen had walked this space dozens of times. Yet it never stayed the same. One morning, the path would rise. The next, it vanished entirely. A stone that once marked the trailhead now lay cracked beside a cedar tree he swore had never grown there. At first, he resisted. He tied colored threads between trees. Scratched marks into bark. Dropped chalk pebbles. But even these vanished. Not moved, unmade. So he stopped mapping the terrain. Instead, he wrote notes. Not about the land, but about what it stirred. The silence here is not emptiness, it's attention. This place does not shift to confuse me. It shifts to reflect me. When I arrived angry, I was lost. When I sat down, the trail returned. He realized, slowly, the place did not want to be known. It wanted to be respected. Felt. Understood through presence, not lines. Some days, the forest opened to him. Other days, it closed. Once, when he was grieving, the trees bent to let sunlight reach his shoulders. Another time, when he felt proud, he wandered in circles until dusk. It was not a place. It was a mirror. The morning came wrapped in a pale mist, thin as old silk. The trees stood still. The world held its breath. Nellen sat on his porch, cradling a warm mug between his hands. Steam curled upward, meeting the cool air like a question left unanswered. Then, footsteps. Light. Intentional. A traveler emerged from the fog. Cloaked in green cloth, stitched with ivy-colored thread. A pouch hung at her side, filled with smooth stones that knocked gently together, like wind chimes half asleep. She nodded once. "You're the one who draws what won't be seen." Nellen gestured to the stool beside him. "I try," he said. "But some places won't be held by paper." She sat. From her pouch, she drew a single stone, oval, dark, polished by river time, and placed it on the wooden table. It was warm. As if it had been carried in the hand of someone with meaning. "I found this," she said, "in the place beyond your map. But only after I stopped trying to arrive." Nellen picked up the stone. Its weight was subtle, but within it, something pulsed. Not sound. Not heat. A quiet rhythm. Like a heartbeat from far away. He looked at her. "How do I know where to go?" "You don't," she said, standing. "You feel." She left without further explanation, her stones clicking like distant memory. He placed the new stone on the corner of the unfinished map. The ink shimmered. Just faintly, but for the first time, something stayed. The next morning, the world felt different. Not louder. Not brighter. But more awake. The forest received him. Not with open arms, but with awareness. As though it remembered him. As though it had been waiting. He walked without direction. Without expectation. He passed trees he could not name. Flowers that glowed faintly from within. A crow followed for a time, then left, as if satisfied with his silence. Then, the clearing. At its center stood a single tree. Not massive. Not ancient. But dignified. Its trunk was smooth, the bark almost silver. Branches curled overhead like open hands, forming a loose crown. Beneath it, moss spread in a perfect circle. Nellen stepped into it, and sat. No wind. No birds. Just breath, and being. Then, without sound, the tree offered him something. Not in words. Not even in image. But in feeling. A child's laughter, bouncing between white birch trunks. A woman's fingers stained with blue dye, painting spiral symbols onto stone. A man setting down a stone at the foot of a grave, not in grief, but in gratitude. The emotions arrived as echoes. He did not see them. He remembered them. Though they were not his. Tears came, not from sorrow, but from release. From connection. From awe. The tree, it seemed, was not a witness of time, but of soul. It showed him not what he had missed, but what he had forgotten within himself. When he finally stood, dusk had begun its slow descent. The moss ring had vanished. But in his satchel, a single silver leaf. He did not recall placing it there. And somehow, he knew not to question it. That evening, Nellen returned to his cottage with quiet hands. The stone from the traveler rested on his windowsill now, beside the leaf, the compass, and a half-dried fern. He poured tea, rosemary and nettle, and sat before the unfinished map once more. He didn't reach for his tools. He simply watched. The map, silent all these years, had changed. The ink along its edge no longer bled or faded, it curled. Like vines gently unfurling. Lines he did not remember drawing had appeared, a spiral of stones, a winding path, a circle with 3 small dots at its center. He leaned closer. The symbols were not geographic. They were reflective. They spoke in metaphor. One shape reminded him of a feeling he had only known once, while watching the first snow fall as a child, wrapped in wool, not yet required to understand the world. Another reminded him of the day he had lost his brother's voice forever. The map, it seemed, was no longer drawing the land. It was drawing him. Or perhaps it always had been. And only now had he slowed enough to see it. He picked up his pen, not to complete the map, but to meet it. Together, they wrote. The forest is not a place. It is a mirror polished by stillness. To chart what moves, you must let go of staying still. What cannot be mapped may still be known. The ink did not fade. He slept deeply that night. And dreamed in shapes. 2 days later, Nellen woke with a sense of direction, though no route. He packed simply, water, dried pears, his journal, and a blanket worn smooth by years of kneeling. He left the map behind. It would not be needed. The forest accepted his entrance like breath accepts air. No path revealed itself. So he followed instinct, the old, forgotten kind, built not from logic but from resonance. His feet brought him to water. A pond, quiet and round, cupped in the hand of the trees. He knelt beside it, expecting reflection. But the surface was not a mirror. It was memory. He leaned forward and saw himself. Not as he was. As he had been. As he could be. A boy tracing shadows with his finger on the wall of his childhood room. A young man speaking too quickly at his mother's table, trying to fill silence with cleverness. An old man yet to come, sitting on the same porch, eyes closed, not from sleep, but contentment. On the 7th day, the forest led Nellen somewhere entirely new. He had not planned to walk far, yet his legs moved with a kind of remembered purpose, as if he were stepping into a thought long delayed. The trees grew close, but not oppressively. They seemed to bow slightly, like old friends making room. The ground sloped downward, gently. At its end, barely visible between 2 tree trunks, was a small opening in the earth. A hollow. He ducked inside. What he found was not a cave. Not entirely. It was a room, of sorts, hidden beneath the roots. The walls shimmered with light filtered through leaves above, and the air smelled of bark, candle wax, and long-closed books. Shelves, grown from roots themselves, lined the interior, each cradling objects more than texts. Bottles filled with sounds. Stones painted with scenes. Threads of red yarn tied into loops, their meaning unknown. And in the center, an empty chair. He did not sit in it. Instead, he circled the space slowly, fingertips brushing wood, eyes gently resting on each relic. The space did not explain itself. It did not rush him. It simply held presence, like a heart that had always been beating. In the far corner, a single word had been etched into the bark of the wall. Stay. He stood in stillness a long while. Then whispered, I hear you. And left with nothing, but more than he'd come with. That night, rain fell, soft, even, purposeful. Nellen lit a single candle, opened his journal, and waited. He had nothing to write. Until, slowly, the map beside him began to change. Not under his pen. On its own. The ink spread in slow, blooming curves. Shapes formed, organic, flowing, like the language of rivers or dreams. Spirals opened into pathways. Lines met and wove around each other like threads drawn through fabric. The forest was not being described. It was being spoken. And Nellen understood, this was not a map to be used. It was a conversation. A living one. He did not reach for his pen. He reached inward, where stillness lived. He closed his eyes. The places we seek do not hide. We pass them because we expect them to stand still. When we stop looking for meaning, we begin to carry it. A path is not made by walking. It is made by being walked. The candle burned low. The rain slowed. And on the table, the map shone faintly, complete. Not in detail. In truth. The pawn did not judge. It did not distort. It returned gaze with grace. He cupped water in his hands. It shimmered. Tasted faintly of lavender and dusk. And as he drank, he understood, this place had never asked him to define it. Only to meet it. He sat for hours, watching nothing change. And in that stillness, something within him shifted. Not broken. Not healed. Aligned. The rain passed by dawn. The earth exhaled mist. Every blade of grass held a pearl. Nellen stepped out into the quiet. The map, still unfurled on his table, no longer called to be corrected, or consulted. It rested. Like a cat curled in sleep. He wandered, not to explore, not to record, but simply to walk. And so his feet, without plan, found a meadow. It was neither wide nor dramatic. A shallow bowl between low hills. At its center stood a lantern. Weathered bronze. Glass panels clouded with time. Unlit. No path led to it. No stone marked its story. He approached. And there, beside the lantern, was a wooden plaque. Worn smooth by rain. Etched with faint, careful letters. You are not lost. You are here. He stood still. The lantern flickered, once. Then glowed, not from flame, but from within. A warmth like memory. Like understanding rising slowly, without fanfare. He placed his hand on its surface. It was warm. Not because he had lit it, but because it had always been lit. Only now did he recognize it. The meadow, the forest, the shifting paths, they had never been unknown. They had only been misunderstood. That evening, Nellen returned home with quiet steps and lighter shoulders. The map lay on his table, gently curled at the corners, its ink set, its lines complete, not with certainty, but with calm. He studied it. Not to analyze. To listen. The symbols were no longer confusing. They were familiar now. Not because they showed him where to go, but because they mirrored where he had been. He folded the map with care. It resisted, just for a moment. Then gave in, like a deep breath let out. He tied it with a ribbon. Placed it on the shelf. Not as a tool. As a relic of a journey inward. He sat with tea. Let silence settle. Then reached for his journal, one last time. He wrote. The unknown edge was never a place I had to find. It was a part of myself I had not yet met. I am still a cartographer. But now, I map not what I see, but what I feel. Some places, like some truths, cannot be drawn. Only lived. He closed the journal. And watched as dusk touched the windowpane. No rush. No need. Just stillness, keeping company. The following week, as the wind turned warmer and the trees began to whisper in new colors, Nellen heard footsteps again. Light. Measured. The traveler had returned. Her cloak was the same. So was her silence. She did not knock. She sat beside him on the porch, where the sun lay in golden ribbons. He poured tea. They drank. And after some time, she spoke. You found it. He nodded. I stopped trying to. She smiled, not with pride, but with recognition. You understand now. Not everything, he said. But enough. He brought out the map, not to show her, but to place beside her. She didn't unfold it. She only laid her hand on the cover, and closed her eyes. That's all it needed, she said. They watched the sky change together, quietly. Two lanterns, lit in different ways. Then she rose. He didn't ask where she was going. She didn't say. But before she stepped down the path, she turned and said, "It's not the place that changes. It's the way we walk through it." Then she was gone. And somehow, he felt her still sitting beside him. Years passed, though he did not count them. He still walked the woods. Still brewed tea. Still sat beneath trees that whispered things without language. People visited, now and then, young cartographers, tired poets, travelers carrying folded maps and questions they couldn't name. He made no claims. He offered no directions. Only stillness. Only stories. He kept the map of the unknown edge in a small wooden drawer. He never opened it again. Not because it had nothing more to give, but because it had already given everything. One evening, as dusk pooled gently at the window, Nellen took out a fresh piece of parchment. Clean. Empty. Full of potential. At the top, he wrote, "The first rule of mapping what cannot be mapped. You are not here to find the path. You are here to remember you are already on it." Then he folded the page, set it beside the map, and went outside. The stars had begun to arrive. Softly. Without rush. Without need. Let us drift a little deeper now. Into still water, where silence glows below the surface. Here, dreams move like boats. And something forgotten waits to be seen. In a valley, so wide, and so deep, that clouds sometimes slept along its edges, there was a lake. A still, glassy lake, so calm it seemed the sky had folded itself gently in two. This lake, known only in the oldest maps as Lyrian, was cupped like a mirror in the hand of a sleeping mountain. Few knew its name. Fewer still had walked its mossy banks. The path that led to it had long been overgrown with wildflowers, and thyme. But one dusky evening, in late spring, when the air was just cool enough to carry secrets, a girl came gliding across Lyrian, in a little rowanwood boat. Her name was Aleska. She was not from the valley. She had come from beyond the misted hills, following old stories that smelled of lavender and salt. Her boat creaked softly as it moved across the lake's silken skin. The oars dipped like swans' wings. She was dressed in twilight-colored linen. Her hair was tied with a silver ribbon, a ribbon, she said, that once belonged to her grandmother. A grandmother who spoke, in hushed tones, of a light beneath the lake. Not a star. Not a lantern. But a lighthouse, buried far below, still standing, still glowing in silence. Aleska did not believe in treasure chests, nor in dragons. But she did believe in lighthouses that glowed without flame. It was not the light that called her, but the quiet of it. The idea that something might shine, without needing to be seen. And so, she came. Rowing past lily pads that curled like commas in a watery sentence. Her breath was soft. Her eyes, searching. When she reached the heart of the lake, the water beneath her changed. Not suddenly, but slowly. Like a curtain being drawn. Soft blue faded into deep violet, and then into a peculiar shade of green. A green that shimmered like the underside of a beetle's wing. Aleska laid her oars inside the boat. She let herself drift. There was no wind. No sound, except the sigh of water, and the distant murmur of loons. She leaned over the edge, and looked deep, deep down. And for a moment, just a flicker, she thought she saw it. A light. Pale. Pulsing. Like a candle behind frosted glass. Then, it vanished. Far beneath the lake, where fish no longer swam, and time moved slower than moss, there stood a lighthouse. Its windows were fogged by centuries of sleep. Its stones were covered in silver-threaded lichen. There were no stairs inside it. Only spirals, of air, and memory. And deep in its heart, sat the keeper. He had no name anymore. Not one he remembered, at least. He had given it up long ago, the way a tree gives up its leaves in winter, trusting they'll one day return. He was not made of flesh, but of something softer. Mist, perhaps. Or memory. He did not shine the light. The light shone by itself. His task was only to watch. To keep the dreaming flame alive. He did not know why the lighthouse had sunk, or why he remained while the rest of the world forgot. But he was never lonely. Dreams visited him often. They drifted down through the lake like falling feathers, someone's half-thought, someone's old wish. And they curled around the light in the tower's crown, warming it. Tonight, however, a new dream arrived. It came not as a feather, but as a ripple. A ripple of awareness. A gaze. The keeper turned toward the ceiling, though it was no ceiling at all, but a watery dome laced with moonlight. Someone was watching. Someone had seen the light. And the light, stirred by that gaze, began to glow brighter. Just a little. The keeper stood. His movements, slow, like smoke unfolding. He placed a hand upon the old glass that wrapped around the lantern chamber, and whispered words long forgotten by wind and wave. May the seeker find what cannot be held. Far above, Aleska blinked. The light was gone again. But something inside her shifted. She felt as though a story had just begun. One she had always known, but never heard aloud. The next morning came wrapped in mist. Not loud or blinding, just soft, silver mist that clung to the boat's edge like breath upon glass. Aleska had not left the lake. She had slept curled beneath a woven shawl, her head resting near the bow, rocked gently by the hush of water and the lull of dreams. And when the first bird sang, distant and low, she opened her eyes. The lake was still. As though the night had never quite ended. She reached for her satchel, a small one, stitched from moss-colored leather, and pulled out a folded paper that crinkled like dry leaves. A map. Not of the valley. Not of the lake. But of dreams. Or so her grandmother had told her. It was a curious thing, this map. Drawn in ink made from ash and violet berries, it didn't show roads or rivers, but swirling lines that looped and branched like roots. In the upper corner was a single word, written in script so delicate it could have been traced by the foot of a moth. Below. Aleska had always thought it strange. But now she pressed her fingers to the paper's soft grain and let her eyes follow its spirals. There. Near the center. A symbol. A shape. A lighthouse. Its spire curling slightly to one side, as though caught in wind that no longer blew. She looked up, then down into the lake. Her reflection gazed back, blurred and trembling. And again, faintly, the light stirred beneath. This time she did not reach for it. She waited. And as she watched, a single moth rose from the folds of her map. Pale, slow, fragile as breath. It hovered, circled once, then began to drift across the lake's surface, toward the east bank, where reeds swayed in rhythmless silence. Ileska followed. She did not row. She simply dipped her oars once, twice, and the lake, as if remembering her grandmother's voice, carried her gently on. The eastern bank was quiet. Not empty, but hushed, like a library that no longer needed books. Birch trees stood here, tall and bone-pale, their trunks marked with soft scars from old winds. Between their roots, the ground shimmered, not with dew, but with fine, glinting dust. Ileska stepped out of her boat, the shore cradling her feet like an old friend. She followed the moth. It flitted ahead, low to the earth, guiding her past flowering vines and stones slick with moss. Soon, she came upon a circle of stones. 7 of them. Worn smooth, each carved with a different pattern, spirals, stars, waves, and eyes. Ileska knelt beside one. The one shaped like a ripple. And there, beneath the curve of its spiral, she saw a tiny key. Not made of metal, but of something gentler. Bone white. Lightweight. Almost musical. She picked it up. Held it to her ear. And from its hollow core, she heard a whisper. Not words exactly. Just the hush of wind through feathers. The lap of water against ancient stone. And the soft, distant chime of glass. She closed her eyes. And in her mind, she saw the lighthouse again. Only now, she was not above it, but inside. Standing on a stairless floor. Light circling gently above her. And in her hand, the key. When she opened her eyes, the moth had landed. It waited atop the stone, wings folded like the pages of a half-finished story. Ileska nodded, slowly. She did not yet know the path forward. But the lake did. And she would listen. The lake had grown quieter. As if it too were holding its breath. Ileska returned to her boat, the pale moth still circling slowly above her. The key rested in her lap, warm from her touch. She let the boat drift, not by oar, but by faith, guided by the invisible fingers of something deeper than wind. Past the eastern shore. Past the floating lilies that opened only at night. Past a cluster of reeds that hummed ever so faintly, as if remembering old songs. There, in the hush between lily stems, the water rippled differently. A circle. Dark, still, and strangely shaped, like a coin pressed into velvet. She leaned closer. Below the surface, a door. Round, with curling symbols etched into its frame. And at its center, just large enough for the key, was a tiny keyhole, shaped like a moth with folded wings. Ileska felt the hush of the moment settle into her bones. She held the key above the water. And slowly, lowered it in. As it touched the surface, the water shimmered, like silk being pulled tight, and the door below pulsed softly, as though waking from a dream. She turned the key. Once. A click, so quiet it was more a feeling than a sound. And then, the lilies around her stirred. Their stems curled downward. Their petals turned inward, folding like hands in prayer. And from below, a path of light bloomed, spiraling downward into the lake. Part 6, The Descent of Silver Steps. Ileska took a breath, long and steady. The lake did not resist her. Instead, it parted, like a curtain of glass. Her boat sank slowly, not with fear, but with grace. As though it had always known this would happen. Water slid past her like smoke, never touching skin, never chilling bone. She floated downward. Beneath her, the spiral of light continued to bloom. Step by step, the silver glimmers curved like the inside of a shell. Each step held a memory. Not hers, but someone's. A bell rung in fog. A song hummed through closed lips. A hand reaching out in the dark, not to hold, but to guide. Ileska passed them all. She did not speak. She did not need to. The light beneath the lake was growing stronger now. Soft, steady, like the glow of embers beneath old wood. And at the bottom, the lighthouse. Whole. Still. Waiting. Its stones glistened, wrapped in vines of pale green that pulsed faintly, as though alive. At the base of the tower stood a door, not round, but tall and narrow, shaped like a flame. It opened before she touched it. Inside was silence. Not empty silence, but the kind that holds every story ever whispered in sleep. And at the center of that silence, the keeper. He stood motionless. Not from stillness, but from knowing. The keeper had been waiting. Not for centuries, not for years, but for a single moment. This one. The moment when someone would come not searching for riches or rescue, but simply to listen. Ileska stepped into the room. It was round, like the spiral of a seashell. The walls curved gently inward, glowing faintly with moss light and old breath. Books were pressed into stone shelves, books made not of paper, but of pressed reeds and memory. The keeper's form shimmered, as if woven from candle smoke and moon thread. His eyes held no color. They were mirrors. And in them, Ileska saw not herself, but the lake. She did not speak. Neither did he. Instead, the air between them thickened, like the moment before a snowfall. Then, slowly, he raised one hand. Opened his fingers. There, resting upon his palm, a second key. Not to a door, but to a truth. It was shaped like a spiral. And at its center, a single, sleeping star. Ileska reached forward, not to take it, but to let it rest against her palm. The keeper's hand faded, like mist pulled back by sunlight. And in her hand, the star stirred. With the star-shaped key warm in her grasp, Ileska moved deeper into the tower. The spiral floor rose beneath her feet, carrying her upward, though she never climbed. The next chamber was wide, quiet, dim. At its center stood a great bowl of clear glass, deep as a well. And within it, water, still and bright. Above the surface, floating without touch, were 100 tiny lights. Each one pulsed gently, like a dream breathing. The keeper's voice came, not as sound, but as thought, carried on stillness. These are the dreams that reached us, the ones too quiet to be heard above the world. Ileska stepped closer. One light hovered near her cheek, glowing with the soft gold of childhood. It pulsed once, then unfolded, and before her eyes, a scene. A boy, lying beneath a willow tree, whispering a wish into his sleeve. A promise to remember his mother's lullaby, long after she was gone. The vision faded. Another drifted near. A woman tracing shapes in the air, unable to speak but telling stories to the stars with her fingers. A song made not of notes, but of breath and gesture. Ileska felt tears form, not of sorrow, but of tenderness. These were not lost dreams. They were dreams kept, held safe. Here, beneath the lake, where silence could carry them gently forward. She opened her palm. The star in her hand glowed brighter. And from the bowl, one light rose higher than the rest. Paler, slower, familiar. Her grandmother's dream. The light, pale, pulsing, patient, rose from the glass bowl like a sigh that had waited too long to be heard. Ileska watched as it drifted toward her, slower than all the others. It did not shine like fire. It glowed like memory. The keeper stepped aside. The room itself grew quieter, as though leaning in. When the light reached Ileska, it circled her once, then touched her forehead. And suddenly, she was not in the lighthouse. She was in a garden. Warm, blurred at the edges. Sunlight filtered through vines of morning glory. Lavender grew wild at her feet, and bees hummed the oldest songs. At the far end of the garden, on a wooden bench with peeling paint, sat her grandmother. She was younger, laughing softly, a book in her lap. Ileska moved toward her, but did not walk. She floated, as though inside a memory that barely remembered itself. Her grandmother looked up, smiled, and then, in a voice like wind through linen, "You found it." The dream folded. The garden faded. The lavender remained. Just a breath of scent. Soft. Lingering. Ileska stood again in the memory room. The keeper's gaze rested gently on her. And in her hands, the second key had changed. It now held a curl of lavender inside its spiral. A memory she had not known she needed. They climbed, though their feet never touched stairs. The lighthouse carried them. Upward. Slowly. Each level they passed was filled with things that had once been forgotten, lullabies without names, letters never sent, wishes whispered into pillows. Finally, they reached the lantern chamber. Here, the glass stretched in every direction, round and clear, as though the lake itself were now wrapped around them. Above, the water shimmered. Below, the lake bed curled in soft shadows. And in the center of the room, floated the lantern. It did not hang. It did not rest. It hovered, suspended in stillness. Ileska stepped close. Its light was quiet, gentle, pale blue, with flecks of gold like falling leaves. She could feel it, not on her skin, but in her chest. A hum. A warmth. A knowing. The keeper raised his hand again. This time, he did not offer anything. He simply pointed to the lantern. Ileska understood. She reached toward it. The moment her fingers touched its light, the world outside the lighthouse paused. The ripples of the lake stilled. The birds grew silent. Even the breeze beyond the mountain peaks forgot to move. And inside her, something opened. A door not made of wood or stone, but of truth. She remembered her grandmother's voice, whispering stories at night. She remembered the silver ribbon in her hair. She remembered the dream she'd had as a child, the one where light lived underwater. And now, she stood inside that dream, holding its heart. The lantern's glow wrapped around Ileska, not like fire, not like sun, but like a blanket still warm from someone who loved her. It didn't speak. But it remembered. It remembered her grandmother. It remembered every seeker who had come close to understanding, then turned back too soon. It remembered lullabies, and wind, and the soft hush of sorrow. And as Ileska stood within its glow, it did something no one had ever seen it do. It pulsed. Not once, but slowly, 3 times. Like a heartbeat. Like a farewell. Then, it settled. And gently, the spiral key in her hand unraveled. The curl of lavender inside it drifted upward, turning into light. And that light entered the lantern. The keeper watched with eyes that flickered, as if 1,000 small candles had blinked behind him. Then, for the first time, he bowed. A slow, reverent motion, graceful as a willow in wind. Ileska bowed in return. She didn't ask what would happen next. She didn't need to. Because the lighthouse had already begun to rise. She floated upward. The spiral path of silver steps unfolded beneath her, like a staircase she would never need again. The waters above parted, not with sound, but with understanding. And when she broke the surface, slow, silent, and shining, the moon was waiting. High above the lake, round and full, it cast a pale light that seemed to recognize her. The boat was still there, drifting quietly, as if it had only just begun waiting. Ileska climbed aboard. The lake rippled once, then stilled. She looked down, into the water. The lighthouse no longer shone. Not beneath the lake. Not within the stone. It shone in her. Her eyes held a gleam like distant stars. Her hands glowed faintly with that soft, dream-colored light. And in her chest, beneath bone, beneath breath, was the lantern. Alive. Quiet. Safe. She did not row. The lake carried her home. Back through reeds that whispered goodnight. Past lilies that opened, just for her. Toward the bank where her journey had begun. There, she stepped onto the shore. The air was still. The grass was warm. The world, unchanged, and yet, entirely different. She turned once more toward the water. The lake reflected the stars. And in that reflection, just for a moment, she saw the lighthouse. Whole. Still. Watching. Then it faded. Not gone. Just sleeping. Eleska wrapped herself in her shawl. She lay in the meadow. Closed her eyes. And for the first time in many years, the lake dreamed too. And now, we rest in the hush between waves. A small island. A steady light. A keeper of quiet. Let this final story glow like a lantern in your hands. There is a small island in the middle of a very old sea, a sea so old, it no longer appears on most maps, and those who still remember its name speak it in a hush, as if disturbing the silence would wake something dreaming beneath the waves. The island has no port, no markets, no carriages rattling across cobblestone roads. It is little more than a grey shoulder of stone wrapped in heather and lichen, and at its highest point stands a single white tower, a lighthouse, round and tall, its brick sea-softened and salt-kissed. This is not an island where stories shout. It is an island where they whisper. Waves roll against the shore like long, slow sighs. Gulls will in the sky without urgency. Time, here, does not march forward. It stretches. It wanders. It rests. And within the lighthouse, alone but not lonely, lives the keeper of the light. He is a man of quiet habit and small comforts. His name is Oswin, though he rarely speaks it aloud. He has been the lantern keeper for longer than he remembers, though the years do not weigh on him. They pass like driftwood in the tide, sometimes catching on the rocks, sometimes slipping away without a trace. Oswin tends the light at the top of the tower not because ships still rely on it, there are few vessels that pass through this forgotten sea, but because it must be kept. It is a gentle promise, a vow made long ago. Not all lights must shine for others to be worth kindling. Each day has its rhythm. He wakes with the sky still pale and blue, walks the spiral stairs to polish the great lantern glass, and oils the brass gears that let the light spin in slow circles. He hums a tune with no name while he works, and the stones seem to hum along with him. Afterward, he brews a pot of tea using the sea mint that grows wild in the cracks between the rocks. He eats a slice of oat bread with honey. And then, after the morning has stretched and yawned, he takes a long walk down to the shoreline where shells gather like scattered thoughts and seaweed writes poems on the sand. Most days, there is little more to do. But Oswin is not one to chase urgency. He tends to the lighthouse with the same patience the sea gives to shaping stone. And every evening, when the sky begins to lean into twilight, he lights the great lamp and watches its glow spiral slowly across the water like a soft, golden thread unraveling across the horizon. That is when the real ritual begins. He goes down the stairs once more, past the shelves of dried herbs and seashell wind chimes, to the small round table by the window facing west. There, always waiting, is a red leather-bound book with worn corners and pages tinted the color of candlelight. Oswin opens it gently, as one might open a door to a friend who does not knock. He writes. The book is not a journal, though many would call it so. It is not a ledger or a log, nor a diary in the usual sense. Oswin calls it the Almanac of Light. Its pages do not track dates or weather, nor are they filled with tales of grand events or important visitors, for there are none. The book holds something quieter, something softer than stories. It holds thoughts. Not many, and not every day. Oswin does not write by habit, only by feeling. Only when the air holds a hush that seems to ask something of him. When the wind curls around the tower like a cat seeking warmth. When the sea seems to murmur a thought just beyond memory. The entries are small. Fragments. Not lessons, exactly, more like echoes of understanding. Lanterns do not chase the dark away. They make peace with it. A smooth stone holds the memory of every storm it has survived. Today I watched a cloud drift over the water. I wonder if it knows it has been seen. Some pages have only one line. Others bear careful sketches of feathers, tide lines, and once, a whale breaching beneath a full moon, drawn in pale pencil so faint it nearly disappears. The book has grown heavy over the years, not from weight, but from the quiet gravity of its contents. Oswin never intended it to be read by another. It is, like the lighthouse itself, a steady thing. A keeper of light, even if no ship comes near to see it. But stories, even the quietest ones, have tides of their own. And sometimes, what is meant for solitude finds its way to someone who needs it. Far from the island, across many shores and cities, a different light flickers in the windows of a city that has long since forgotten how to sleep. Far away from the hush of waves and the lull of lanterns, there lived a young woman named Leora in a city that did not rest. The clocks in her world never stopped. Their hands circled with perfect precision, marking minutes that came too fast and hours that slipped away unnoticed. Even the moon, when it hung over the rooftops, looked weary of keeping time. Leora was a professor at the university, a scholar of stories and language, of myths and meanings. Her lectures were thoughtful, her papers published, her name respected in all the ways that cities reward. But inside her, something had begun to fray, quietly and without complaint. She woke each morning beneath shelves of papers and notes, to-do lists fluttering like white leaves across her desk. Her days were a string of appointments, meetings, and unanswered messages. Her nights were dim screens and blinking lights, glowing softly but never warmly. She still loved what she taught, but it felt thinner now, like tea brewed too many times with the same leaves. Words that once made her soul lift now lay flat on the page. She longed for something she could not name, only that it felt like an ache beneath her ribs and a hollowness in her breath. One rainy evening, after her last lecture had ended and the campus lights hummed in the mist, she left her office not for home, but for nowhere in particular. She wandered, umbrella closed at her side, letting the drizzle soak into her hair. She found herself at the edge of the old quarter of the city, where forgotten shops and crooked doorways leaned close together like old friends. And there, tucked between a tea house and a shuttered florist, was a shop she had never noticed. Its sign had no name, just a painted lantern, faintly glowing in gold. The bell above the door rang with the sound of a wind chime touched by the sea. Inside, the shop smelled of parchment and cedar. It was filled with books, but not in neat rows. They were piled and stacked, leaning in casual familiarity, as though each had wandered there of its own will. Behind the counter sat a very old man with cloud-colored hair and half-moon glasses, scribbling into a tiny notebook with a fountain pen that looked like it had written time itself. He did not look up when Leora entered. He only gestured, gently, toward the shelves. "You may take one," he murmured, "but only the one that asks for you." Leora didn't reply. She walked slowly through the aisles, brushing her fingers over spines bound in linen and leather, wood and waxed paper. Some titles glowed faintly, others had none at all. And then she saw it. On a low shelf near the back, between a book about weathered stars and another that smelled of lavender, sat a red leather-bound book. Worn corners. Sea-softened pages. It had no title on the spine, but as she reached for it, the air around it seemed to grow still. She opened the book. The handwriting was small and careful. The ink slightly faded, but not illegible. It smelled faintly of salt. Today the fog didn't lift until nearly nightfall. I sat in it anyway. There is a kind of peace in being unseen by the world. She turned the page. Not every journey needs a destination. Sometimes the walking is the answer. Another. I lit the lantern tonight not for any passing ship, but for the sky itself. Perhaps the stars forget where they are, too. Leora's breath caught in her chest. She could not say why. Only that the ache under her ribs softened. As if the book had named something she had not known she carried. She brought the book to the counter. The old man looked up for the first time. He smiled, not kindly, not knowingly, but simply, as if he understood. "That one," he said, "has been waiting some time." She left the shop and stepped into the night. The rain had stopped. The streets shimmered like ink. And in her satchel, the almanac whispered not with words, but with a weight that felt like home. Leora read the almanac that night long after the city had gone to sleep. She made a pot of chamomile tea and curled into the corner of her old armchair, where her cat, Thistle, blinked once and resumed his soft, rhythmic purring. The room was lit only by a golden desk lamp, and outside the window, rainwater slid lazily down the glass like thoughts not ready to be spoken. She opened the book and let her fingers fall to a page. There is nothing wrong with moving slowly. Even the moon takes a full night to rise. She smiled, small, unhurried. The words were not trying to impress. They didn't ask for attention. They simply were. Another page. I brewed tea today with thyme and sea mint. It tasted like a memory I don't have. And another. A quiet evening. No ships. No storms. Just the soft ticking of the lantern gears and the creak of old wood settling into itself. Leora read until her eyelids drooped and her breath slowed. The pages did not tell a story with a beginning, middle, and end. They moved like waves, returning and retreating, leaving behind something you didn't know you'd needed. She dreamed that night of a lighthouse standing in a sea of clouds, and a man lighting a flame not for the lost, but for the ones who hadn't yet known they needed finding. When she woke, her tea was cold, Thistle was curled around her ankle, and the almanac was still resting on her lap, warm to the touch, as if it had been quietly keeping watch. On the island, Oswin stood at the top of the lighthouse, the lantern light circling out across the water in slow, thoughtful arcs. The stars blinked above like old friends, familiar and distant. He leaned on the railing, sipping cement tea from a chipped mug painted with a moon. He didn't know where the almanac had gone. He hadn't meant to lose it. One day it had been on his desk, the next, the sea had taken it, or the wind, or time itself. He had searched for it, yes, but only gently. Some things are meant to travel. He had begun a new one, a second volume, bound in green cloth, its pages still mostly blank. But his writing came slower now. As if something was listening elsewhere. He sometimes imagined the red book nestled in someone's hands, far away. He liked to think of it resting in a quiet shop, or in the satchel of a wanderer who needed more peace than maps. He did not expect that it had found a tired professor in a distant city. But perhaps some lights travel further than they shine. That evening, he wrote something new. I do not know where the book has gone. But if it rests in your hands, I hope it brings you stillness. Not answers. Just stillness. The sea taught me that even questions can be beautiful. Then he closed the green volume and placed it gently on the table. He did not blow out the lantern upstairs. He let it spin slowly in the dark, as steady as breath. And far away, Leora reached for her tea and opened the red book again, this time to a page that had not been there before. She blinked. I hope it brings you stillness. Her heart beat softly, like a knock on a door not yet opened. Somehow, across wind and wave, the words had reached her. Leora carried the red almanac with her everywhere now. Tucked between lecture notes, beside her coffee mug during morning meetings, even resting on her knees during the train ride home beneath the city's flickering lamps. She did not read it constantly, only when the noise within her felt louder than the world outside. And in those moments, it calmed her. The words never told her what to do. They did not instruct or advise. They simply reminded. It is all right to leave some things unfinished. Even the tide does not reach every grain of sand. If you feel far from yourself, be still. You are not lost, you are arriving. The almanac became something more than a collection of thoughts. It became a rhythm. A companion. And slowly, very slowly, Leora felt herself softening at the edges. She began to speak more gently in her lectures. She paused longer between ideas. She looked at her students' faces, not just to teach, but to see them. She watered the plant in her office more often, and once, she caught herself humming in the stairwell. The month passed like a breath. No great change came. And yet, everything was different. On the island, the weather turned. It was not a storm, not in the sense of thunder or crashing waves. But the sky grew heavy with silver clouds, and the sea became thoughtful. The wind arrived in sighs, curling its way through cracks in the lighthouse and rustling the pages of Oswin's new green almanac. He had written less lately. Not for lack of thoughts, but because he felt the words were still being read elsewhere. As if, by some quiet miracle, his older self was still speaking through the red book, and someone, somewhere, was still listening. So instead of writing, Oswin walked the shore more often. He watched the tide, gathered pale shells like folded petals, and stood for long moments watching kelp sway beneath the surface like long green thoughts drifting in water. One morning, he found a small glass bottle half buried in sand. Its cork was frayed, but inside was a piece of parchment, curled and dry. He had found dozens of these over the years, and they almost never contained anything but forgotten scribbles, poems, or dreams. But this one read only. I don't know where you are, but I think you saved me. Thank you. Oswin stood there a long time. He turned it over once, then again. The handwriting was unfamiliar, hurried, but something in the way the words bent told him more than the words themselves. He smiled, soft and private. He didn't know where the message had come from, or how far it had drifted. But somehow, he did know. And in that knowing, something inside him glowed, quietly. That evening, he lit the lantern as always. But for the first time in many seasons, he climbed the stairs twice, not to tend the light, but to sit beside it. To let it warm his back while he looked out at the sea. And he whispered, not to the wind, but to the waves themselves. She's reading it still. The sea, in its ancient way, said nothing. But the light stretched a little farther into the dusk. It became a ritual for Leora. Each night, before she let the silence wrap around her and sleep slowly return her to herself, she opened the red almanac and wrote, not in its pages, but in a small notebook of her own, bound in dark blue linen. At first the pages were brief. Fragments. Murmurs. Echoes of thoughts stirred by the almanac's quiet voice. I've forgotten how to rest without feeling guilty. Why does the sky feel closer on rainy days? Today, I did nothing, and somehow, it felt full. But with time, her notebook became a place where she wrote things she had never said aloud. Not confessions, not declarations, just small truths. I miss a version of myself I never really met. I don't want everything to be loud to feel real. And once, I wonder if the keeper ever grew tired. Or if the sea gave back what it took. She never addressed these pages to anyone. And yet, she imagined she was writing to him, not as a stranger, but as someone whose silence had been understood. She did not know what he looked like. She imagined sea-worn hands, a face mapped by soft years, a voice like weathered wood. She began to wonder if people could be lanterns too, quietly lighting the way, not with fire, but with presence. That thought stayed with her, long after she closed the book each night. The island stood still in the hush of early spring, when the sea is not yet warm, and the winds are still sorting out their direction. Oswin had finished his last jar of honey, and the sea mint had begun to peek through the cracks again. One afternoon, as he sat by the window watching the kelp rise and fall beneath the waves, he felt a deep stillness within, a stillness not empty, but full. Like the silence that follows the last note of a song played just right. He opened the green almanac, but found he had nothing more to write. And then he thought of the red one. Not with longing. Not with sorrow. Just a sense of completeness. He walked the spiral stairs to the top of the tower and placed his hand on the lantern's smooth frame. It was warm. He closed his eyes and stood there a long time, breathing with the sea. That evening, he took a small slip of paper and, with a slow and steady hand, wrote one final line in the red book, not on its old pages, but as a message tucked into its binding, should anyone ever look closely enough to find it. It read, "When you are finished searching, the light will wait for you, not to guide you away, but to welcome you home." He folded the note and pressed it between the last pages, where it would rest like a gentle secret. Then he placed his pen beside the green almanac and went out to tend the lantern, as he always did. Far across the sea, in her quiet city flat, Leora looked out her window as dusk fell and felt a warmth rise in her chest. Not urgent. Not dramatic. Just certain. She had never met him. And somehow, she had. Months passed, and the city did not change. Cars still sighed through puddled streets. The campus bells still rang too loudly. Coffee still steamed from paper cups, and windows still flickered with blue light long after midnight. But something within Leora had softened so gradually it felt less like change and more like becoming. She still gave lectures. Still read her students' essays. Still rushed, sometimes. Still forgot things, sometimes. But now, she also paused. She also walked slower when the wind smelled of rain. She also let herself stare at the sky without calling it a waste. And always, at the end of each week, she returned to the almanac. Not every night. Not every page. But when the world inside her felt crowded, she opened it like a door, and stepped into the silence of a room she trusted. And then, one spring evening, she found the note. It was tucked neatly between two pages near the end, pages she had somehow skipped all this time. The paper was thinner than the rest, the ink a deeper brown. She unfolded it slowly, hands trembling as if she already knew. When you are finished searching, the light will wait for you, not to guide you away, but to welcome you home. She read it twice. Then once more. And tears came, not loud or sharp, but slow and full. Like something had opened inside her that had long been sealed. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even joy. It was something quieter. Recognition. She held the book to her chest and closed her eyes. She did not need to travel to the island. She didn't need to find him, not in the way she once thought. She understood now, the lantern had never been a destination. It had always been a reflection. She had never left herself. only needed light enough to see the path inward again. On the island, Oswin sat beside the lantern with a cup of tea. The sea was calm, wrapped in mist, and the sky held the first stars of night. He rocked gently in his chair and listened, not for anything in particular, but with the patience of someone who trusted that whatever needed to arrive, would. He did not know what had become of the red almanac. He did not need to. He could feel it, somehow, its words drifting outward, carried not by post or ship, but by the quiet current that flows between souls. He imagined a young woman in a city far away, sitting by her window. He imagined her lifting her eyes from the page and resting her hand over her heart. He imagined her not feeling so alone anymore. And in the soft hush that followed, he whispered a thought, not written in any book, not sealed in a bottle, not spoken aloud until now. Let the light you tend also warm you. He smiled. Not because anything had ended, but because it hadn't. The lantern continued to spin in slow, measured circles. Not because anyone needed saving, but because someone, somewhere, might still be looking for home. And so the story rests, not with a conclusion, but with a glow. The lantern stays lit. The almanac stays open. And the silence holds, soft and welcoming, like arms that do not ask, only receive. May the light find gentle places to land. And may the reader, weary or wondering, remember. Stillness is not the absence of life. It is where life waits to be heard.